Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, experienced scientists, serial entrepreneurs, and biotech investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup. Gain actionable insight into navigating the life sciences industry in each episode as we explore the business of science from pre-seed to IPO with your host, John Chi. The purpose of the Biotech Startups podcast is to provide general insight into the ever-changing world of life sciences through the experience of a variety of guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast are at the user's own risk. The views expressed by guests and any employee of Exceeder on the podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Exceeder or content sponsors. Any appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement or recommendation of any product, service, or entity referenced in the podcast by Exceeder or by its guests. In our last episode, we spoke with James Evans about his childhood and the lessons he drew from it, his Belgian lab experience, and his move to the US to pursue his passion for imaging research. If you missed it, be sure to go back and give it a listen. Today, we're excited to continue our conversation, diving into James's time at MIT's Whitehead Institute, finding the quickest way to the most effective data, his path to entrepreneurship with PhenoVista, and the culture shock of leaving academia for the private sector. So sit back, relax, and let's get started.
After your time at MIT and working in Paul's lab and getting all this experience, what got you, like, did you just wake up one day and chose entrepreneurship and decided to leave this gig? Like, that gig sounds awesome. And, it's, I would imagine something kind of lit a fire. What did that for you?
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much. It was, so Paul made the decision to move to Singapore. And it was there was a lot of collaboration that it was great to be a part of between MIT and Singapore. The last few years that was at MIT, and so Paul had an opportunity to move to Singapore and head up the biology department there, and I kind of helped with the transition, but I'd already kind of made my move from the UK to the US, and I really wasn't. Frankly speaking, Singapore is extremely humid, and my hair gets really, really, really froey. I couldn't afford the hair gel that I would need to survive there. So I thought honestly, like, it was time for me to kind of go out on my own. I had a great opportunity working with Paul in a, like you said, a really prestigious, incredible environment for 10 years. And I was like, I kind of looked around and saw other people who had kind of stayed in that environment. I was like, okay, I can either choose and kind of like just stay in this environment for the rest of my career or go out on my own. And I decided to go out on my own, and dude, it was hard. Like, I remember just walking the streets, like literally walking the streets thinking, how am I going to pay rent? And just, trying to, get little gigs with this company and that company. And then, a friend of mine introduced me to a VC funded biotech company who was looking for help with high content. And that became like half my paycheck a month. And I ended up working for them for a couple of years and, helping them kind of get high content up and running and helping them interpret the data. And that was really good because it helped me pay my rent, but also it was really good. It was also really helpful and sort of as an education to sort of how science is done in that environment. And I worked alongside a lot of scientists there, and then there was a particular kind of senior guy who we used to work with who kind of ran the group, and he was like industry veteran, and he was, in the best way possible, a total bastard. Like, you would present data and he would be like just tearing it apart, and you'd be like, oh, I hate you. And it would make you, it'd make you like have to make it, ironclad, because you just, you prior to, you get into this, and then like, the next time you'd be, okay, well, well, how is this guy going to like take it apart? So you'd start like, defending your day, making it, impenetrable and to criticism. And, it's just great. It just makes you stronger. And again,
Yeah.
that's another thing that like, translates now is that it's like when we're presenting data to client, you're like, well, what's the client going to say about this? They're going to have questions about this weird trend there. And, and so like, let's explain it. Or if we can't, then we can't. But like put yourself in that position. So that was great. That great training. It was really funny because I used to for a time there, I lived in Manhattan. I worked I had a client down in Manhattan 1 day a week, and then I would drive up to Boston. And there was always a Tuesday morning meeting at 9 a.m. And so I'd have to leave Manhattan at like 5 or 6 a.m. to drive up. So by the time I got to this like 9 a.m. meeting to review data with this very what's it called, particular director,
Yeah.
I'd be like sleep deprived and grouchy from driving. So I was just like fired up and ready for a fight. So it was always like, it was always pretty funny. Yeah,
I'd be like the baptism of fire, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was good, and made lots of friends there that I've kept in touch with over the years, and then I was working for a bunch of different companies, and then one of my clients was based here in San Diego, and had just been awarded a contract with the EPA to do this ToxCast screening, and needed somebody to kind of build up that capability and execute on that contract. And so just kind of within a week had moved over to San Diego, and I like surfing. I've been surfing for longer 20 years or something now. Mostly, started surfing on the East Coast and going down to Puerto Rico in the winter and doing that with friends at MIT. And so I used to come out to San Diego whenever I could. So it was a good opportunity. And moved out here and worked on that contract, built up a team. And it was, again, really good experience. And that's where I met Tony, who's the co-founder of PhenoVista. He was in my group, and we saw an opportunity to start our own company, kind of with our own kind of rules and sort of focus and everything. And so Tony and I started PhenoVista at the end of 2014. It was just the two of us, and both of our significant others had proper jobs. So they agreed to kind of let us go back to sort of postdoc level earning and try and write some grants and see if we can get some momentum going. And I built the first website. We signed a lease in like October, November. We moved in the end of November. We had no clients. We had been talking to a couple of people, and but we had no paying clients at that point, and we just had like kind of a runway. And we're like, okay, we're going to pay ourselves X per month. We got our rent to cover. We can we have like a year of runway, maybe. and then we got our first. We started making money in January. And when I say making money, we were making like a couple $1,000. It was like enough to cover our rent, maybe. But by March, by like the springtime, we were cash flow positive. We were paying ourselves and paying the rent and gathering momentum. We didn't have time to write grants. We were paying customers, and then we ended up hiring our first full-time employee in within a year. So October of that 2015, we hired Erika Martin, who is still with the PhenoVista. Thankfully, she's our number one employee. She's our senior director of lab operations. So I know Erika so she was a high school intern at the imaging core facility at the Whitehead.
Wow.
So I know. So she
Full
went
circle.
through like So she had gone through like from ground up microscopy training, and she's just been she has so much energy. She's just a huge part of the culture of PhenoVista, and trains and manages. I mean, she does so much, and Yeah, so for like 2 or 3 years, well, I guess about 2 years, it was Tony, me, and Erika. And one of the funniest things was just like when it was Tony and me, we had this shared office, and I would do the music, and he would and I would do all the biz development marketing. He would do all the lab work, and I would have like I wasn't even Spotify because I wasn't around with like Pandora or whatever was on,
Hmm.
and we'd have like bands that we both hated. So whenever one of these bands would come on, we'd add it to the post-it note on the back of the door and be like,
Yeah.
"No fly list. This cannot come on."
Yeah.
So we'd have that, and and Tony, and we had this like tissue culture room in the back of the lab, which was like because we had like we found this deal on hoods. We went in this basement and found these hoods that we thought, oh, there's no way these are going to work. They're going to need like maintenance and stuff. But we've gone for like $500 each, and they worked. They just needed certifying,
Wow.
and they worked. But we had three of them crammed in this like little like closet. And so in the summer it was super hot in there. So Tony's going in there doing tissue culture, and he's like stripping off to like he's
Yeah.
not work appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
what you can do. And then he would just come out like dripping in sweat. I was like, oh my God, he's gross. So then when we got Erika, we kind of had that was our first kind of like, okay, well, we're going to have to kind of get a little bit more professional, but still,
Yeah.
it was still pretty friendly. But what was really crazy, just from an organizational perspective, was miscommunication. Because when it was Tony and me, there was one line of communication. If you're not doing it, the other guy's doing it.
Yep.
There's nowhere to hide. When there's three of you, you've suddenly got like you go from one line of communication to three lines of communication, and the sort of rate of error is way higher, and
Yep.
we would drop balls, and we would like get mad at each other, and could be tears and gnashing of teeth. And so that was really the start of like, okay, well, we need to put together a system. We need to have like process development, and we used to have these big whiteboards of truth. We'd have like the two massive whiteboards with like all the projects that were going on and what's happening each day, and that was really the start of what we've developed at PhenoVista, which is a lot of internal processes to make sure we don't screw up and we don't miss the make a mistake in terms of the details, or forget to do something, or completely forget about a project, which back in the day, it happened. I remember going to tell, hey, how's that project going along? He's like, what project? And we're like, it's supposed to be
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah. So I mean we're so yeah, sort of yeah, it's definitely a multifaceted problem running a scientific business, for sure.
Totally. And it's, I have so many directions I kind of, and I kind of want to kind of go with and kind of like pull on the string. And like, so like, I'm thinking about this like chronologically. You're at MIT, and then, which is academic, has one type of lab work environment and processes there. And then you go into, you basically go into a venture-backed kind of company, for profit, and which has a bunch of different processes there. Clearly, with one of the managers who has his own process. And then you go from Boston, then you go to Manhattan, and then you go to San Diego, and then you end up starting your own business and doing fulfilling the grant. Each environment, like, how would you say, like, maybe we start with, we kind of like chunk it out, and moving from academia to this venture-backed startup, and obviously the defending your work was one aspect. What were some other kind of like hard lessons learned, or like kind of like key takeaways when you made that transition?
I think the hardest one I saw was, so I was working alongside a lot of really talented scientists, and this VC-backed company would obviously have changes in direction or priorities or funding or whatever, but you would just see, I remember some restructuring that went on, and it just seemed so like unfair, having not been sort of not used to it, right? Because you're like, but these scientists are really good and they work really hard, and you're just canning them all for, and now fast forward, you kind of you just realize like it's not about how hard you're working, or it's just like we just have a change in priorities. And sure enough, these people went and got jobs elsewhere, pretty quickly. It's traumatic, but it was kind of like, oh wow, this is different, because in academia that just really doesn't happen. You don't really like, people are only let go if they're did something really terrible or really bad. So but this is much more based on the kind of the company's need for talent, and sort of changing that to the changing needs. That was probably the biggest kind of sort of cultural or sort of organizational difference that happened for me.
Absolutely. And I think that was a same. I had a similar experience too. Just like it's kind of just like a shock to the system, coming from academia and then going into the kind of private sector. And did you notice like obviously there's like a weather difference, and San Diego surf is great. When you went to the West Coast, was there kind of like any kind of, and it was you and your co-founder, but kind of was there a different vibe, or what was your experience moving from East Coast to West Coast, and working on the lab on the West Coast, and then obviously what was that like?
I think it's funny. I mean, I think there is that stereotype of West Coast folks tend to be maybe a bit more upbeat and sort of positive, and East Coast and definitely Boston, people are more. It's I guess it's hard because there is a lot of fluidity and a lot of people move back and forth and everything. But just obviously for work now, I travel back to Boston pretty frequently to meet with clients, and I should say all our clients are lovely. But but there is a sort of a hard edge, and I think California tends to be a little bit more sort of like, let's look at the cup half full a little bit more in general. But I think even within PhenoVista, we have I'm really proud of how diverse our sort of our company is, both sort of culturally, but also in terms of sort of strength, like the type of people and their personalities. So we don't have like just a bunch of people thinking the same way. You definitely have people with different perspectives, and I think that's really important. And I think I can see that being important, across the industry too, with companies having East Coast, West Coast sites and so on. And it's but yeah, definitely, it was a lot easier. It was a lot easier to kind of balance, doing, I guess, 10 years in Boston, and then having spent 10 years in California since then. It's obviously my I'm older and I got family now in California. I didn't have that back when I was a postdoc. It was all just about the lab grind. So that worked out well for me because I could really sort of pour myself into lab life during my sort of 20s and 30s, and then so now, although still work long hours, it's a lot easier to kind of immediately switch from sort of work mode to sort of spending time with the family, run down to the beach for after work or something. It's a lot more doable.
Yeah, I completely agree. My wife is from Southern California, so and we actually just came back from a trip. Can't say I'm a surfer, but I can appreciate beaches. And something that really resonated with me that you mentioned earlier was your wife and helping with the original like grant writing and being having the real job. And Chloe, my wife, was also had a similar kind of impact on for us in Exeter, and just how important it is to have someone who is supportive of it, because I don't think it would be, at least for Exeter, be possible if Chloe wasn't there, in the especially in the early days when like that's what you said, like before you have a client, like it's like it's so so difficult.
No, I mean it sounds a bit cliche, but I mean, like, I wouldn't have started PhenoVista if it wasn't for my wife. Like, she's the one who believed in me and gave me the support. And her, her day job is very I get a lot of free advice from her kind of things she brings home from her day-to-day job. So that's been really helpful from sort of an organizational perspective too. But yeah, I mean, yeah, running a business it's incredibly hard. I mean, it's the hardest thing. I mean, it's like grad school hard, and just the, we were talking earlier on about like, solving problems. But yeah, the problem is you solve a problem and then the problem evolves and you got to solve it again. It's a little bit more like, for me, having small kids, like it's, you do sleep training and you're like, oh yeah, kids are sleep trained, done and done. And then you're like, oh, then they grow out of it and you got to do it again. And then it's the next thing. And it's like, it's a lot like a business in terms of, the problems you solved when your company was, 6 or 8 or 10 people, those don't work when your company's 25 people. And, I haven't got to, 50 plus, 300 plus. I can only imagine, like, they're just, the biggest, for me, the biggest problems, the science, the imaging, the computational aspects, all those things are, that's my wheelhouse. Like, and then we have lots of scientists who can kind of, tackle those. They're not easy, but we have the skill set. The tricky things are, where we work with, people like yourself is, getting access to capital to get the instrumentation we need, to like managing HR and benefits and stock options, and like, dealing with their HR issues and, this kind of stuff. That's horrendous.
Yeah, it's like, and again, it's kind of like no one tells you about all of these things beforehand, before you decide to embark on it.
But you wouldn't listen if they did. I mean, like, because you wouldn't know. You'd be like, yeah, that's no, this is the classic, is like, because, as scientists, if the science is good, everything else will be fine. Yeah, kind of. I mean, the science does need to be good, but it's maybe 10 or 20% of the problem. Like, science does have to be absolutely good. So does the accounting. So does the marketing. So, so do all these other things, which you never even thought about, until you start doing it. Insurance, crap like that. It's
that's exactly the same feeling I felt too, and I still continue to feel. And I guess, the problem, kind of like the problem solving, like what you're describing, is exactly how I feel about it too. It's like multivariable, and the thing mutates. And like, I was playing Zelda with the new Zelda with my wife, and there's a lot of like these temples and shrines where you go in. It's a problem that, yes, there are variables, but there's not a growing amount of variables. You can solve this thing and then move on. But when you go like with business, there's emotions involved, and then there's all the
time pressure.
Time pressure, and when you're trying to focus on the science, and then you have to learn, like you said, insurance. It's like these feel like very disparate things. And so I completely, kind of, I'm getting like PTSD thinking about it. But as when you were just starting PhenoVista, and I'm kind of like zooming out, like what was like the big driving force for you and your co-founder? Like, was it an instance where you saw a huge, kind of underserved market where you thought, we can be the ones to fill this need? Or was it something where it's like, well, the current options are, subpar and we can do it better? And, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but like, what were you thinking when founding PhenoVista?
Yeah, it was kind of a combination of those things, to be honest. I mean, I think that the big thing, looking back on it now and kind of, having some perspective on it, this is like almost 10 years ago now. IPS derived technology was still relatively new, and we were using IPS derived neurons back when we were doing this work for the EPA, and Fujifilm, was really the only provider of those cells at the time. And but there were still, people were not really, people being, people in biotech and pharma, were kind of, jury was still out on sort of whether these were good good model systems. And so when Tony and I started, PhenoVista, we were like, oh, okay, well, Tony's like really got great hands in the lab, and he can make cells jump through hoops. And so when we first started, we were doing a lot of like bake-offs between human iPS-derived neurons and like rat primary cultures and things like that. And people were like really wanting to kind of see how the data kind of stacked up. And we don't do that anymore. Like people are like, okay, yeah, IPS all the way. Let's do co-cultures with astrocytes. Let's do tricultures with microglia. Let's put in some disease phenotypes. Let's do it in 3D and make it fun. People are like way more kind of pushing the envelope now. But yeah, our kind of it's sort of the marketing speak was to democratize access to phenotypic screening, and yeah, it worked out to be pretty good timing. Yeah, and we started off with neurons, and working with Fujifilm, and we looked for other providers, and there are more providers now that are available. But Fujifilm has a really good good quality product, and so yeah, we definitely still work a lot with Fujifilm.
Awesome. And when you and Tony were just starting, and would you say, like, when you were conceptualizing the business model, were you drawing upon a lot of like your core facility kind of grad school experience in Vala, and then like kind of modifying it and doing it the PhenoVista way?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, like it's kind of a funny joke that like the business model, like and business plan, we never wrote one. Just kind of did it. Just kind of like mapped out like, okay, look, this is what we're going to pay ourselves. This is the rent. This is how much time we've got to like kind of earn X, Y, and Z. And we had to be really opportunistic because we didn't know whether this was going to work, and we weren't in a position to turn down any work. So we took any job for any money we could in the first 6 months. For like, we did whatever. And I mean, I think that's the difference between being bootstrapped versus sort of venture backed or something like that, where you kind of have a mission and you stick to it, whereas like bootstrap, you kind of like, let's see where this takes us and go with and so what we ended up with 5 years after that is a business model that's like forged in the real world, right? Like it's market validated, like it doesn't like people ask us, so you cash flow positive? You're like, yeah, because if we're not in business. Like that's you gotta be. So like that's how we ran the business. Very very sort of capital efficient. Yeah.
And what compelled you to build it in the bootstrap kind of path versus the what your previous role had a venture back experience? Was there a kind of a impetus or kind of a choice, a cognizant choice that you made?
Yeah, no, not well. You see, the companies that I worked at previously that had venture back, I wasn't involved in any of that, fundraising, right? So I had no skill set or network, so it was really necessity. I was like, well, you're going to do it the old-fashioned way, and because that's all I know, and I didn't have like a year to go out and raise money, and I didn't have a track record. I mean, maybe I did, but I didn't feel that I could go and like kind of do a roadshow and raise funds. And to be honest, like a lot of companies had previously tried to do high content screening or assay services and not been able to make it work. So it would be a hard sell. So it was really just sort of set the bar really low in terms of like, okay, what are we going to try and do, and just build on it. And that's what we did. We just managed to sort of get cash flow positive in the first year, hire some people, and then just grow organically. Get some business development help in Boston after a couple of years, and and then that started to really sort of grow our revenue, and then took on some outside investment in the last couple of years and helped us kind of start scaling the growth. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is really trying to sort of keep the growth accelerating, and start working on things that we never even thought of, really. I mean, I guess we did. We, thinking about margins and EBITDA, and all these kind of things, and getting a lot of the kind of support that we never had in the first few years. Like having financial professionals full time on the staff to work on cost accounting and forecasts and things like that. So it's almost like a real company.
That's all for today's episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our insightful conversation with James Evans, covering his experience at the Whitehead Institute, his move to San Diego, his rollercoaster journey towards entrepreneurship, and the joy of building a culture at PhenoVista that respects work-life balance. To learn more about James's journey, be sure to tune in to our next episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again on the Biotech Startups podcast for part 3 of James's journey, where we will cover his take on solving the growing pains of a startup, what it is like working as a bootstrapped company, and the differences between working with small companies and large corporations. The Biotech Startups podcast is brought to you by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Make sure to search for Biotech Startups Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and click subscribe. To learn more about our leasing program, visit our website, www.excedr.com. We provide research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support a path to exceptional outcomes. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening.